What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and this is another edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast, where we take a look at a specific card and talk about it for a little while. And we've been doing a whole run of the Streets of New Capenna spoilers because this set looks fantastic. And today is no exception. We have a great addition to the Ascendancy cycle, this time with Riveteers Ascendancy. It is black, red, green for an enchantment that says, whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may return target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Do this only once each turn. Now, this is a 3-drop enchantment that does nothing when it first drops on the field, is noteworthy. That said, do nothing enchantments you generally want to be cheaper. We see a lot of these with cards like Hallowed Haunting that are at 4, where they drop and they don't do anything the turn they come into play, and then they give you value later. You know, we've also seen it with cards like Moldavine Reclamation in older sets and those types of things. So in this case, it being a 3-drop, I think is very, very meaningful. That's actually makes it a lot easier to cast, a lot more flexible. It slots into your mana curve a little bit earlier at a time when you can afford to take a couple hits from aggro decks and afford to take a couple of you don't need to necessarily be establishing a board presence if you're not in an aggro strategy. And there was already a Riveteer deck that I was really looking forward to building prior to this card being spoiled, and I want to talk about it a little bit because I think Riveteers Ascendancy fits into it perfectly. So let's take a look at what Riveteers Ascendancy is trying to do. So what you want to do is you want to be sacrificing creatures. It's not whenever a creature dies. So it has to be sacrificed. It can be on any turn, notably, and then you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield if the creature in your graveyard has lesser mana value than the sacrificed creature. So we need to be sacrificing creatures with a relatively high mana value. You know, Deadly Dispute, Shambling Ghast isn't really going to get you there this time around. That said, if you're sacrificing cards like a Fell Stinger to a Deadly Dispute, you can get your Shambling Ghast back. All right, that's not nothing, but it's something. But where this card I think is really going to shine is going to be in decks that leverage larger creatures that can be sacrificed. And this actually fits really, really nicely with Ziatora, the guild leader or the family head of the Riveteers. That is a 6/6 flying dragon for 6 that says whenever you or at the end of your turn, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, Ziatora basically deals damage equal to the power of the sacrificed creature to any target, and you create 3 treasure tokens. Three treasure tokens. So Ziatora works really, really well with this because you can sacrifice a fairly large creature, dome your opponent for a high amount, or remove their biggest threat off the board, get 3 treasure tokens, and then you get another creature back out of your graveyard. So that's fantastic. Black also has a ton of graveyard filling stuff going on in this set, so that's something to keep in mind. The deck that I plan on building specifically with Ziatora as the top end involves a lot of the Kamigawa dragons because they are relatively high mana value creatures that fit nicely on curve, that you can sacrifice for value, and then they can resurrect each other really, really nicely. So imagine this: Riveteers Ascendancy on 3, Atsushi, the Blazing Sky on 4, into Junji on 5. You sacrifice Junji, you sacrifice Atsushi first, some kind of effect. Then you get Ziatora down on 6. Now, this is kind of Magical Christmas Land, but just go with me on this. Ziatora gets down on 6. Atsushi's in your graveyard. You use Ziatora, sack Junji, hit your opponent, force them to discard 2 cards, and they lose some life. You then get Atsushi back. It enters the battlefield tapped because of Riveteers Ascendancy. You get a ton of treasure tokens lying around. You untap with Atsushi, and just Bob's your uncle, you're in good shape. So you basically trade Junji for Atsushi. You get all the benefits of all those death triggers, and you downgrade one card. That ain't bad. You got a 3-drop or a 2-drop line in your graveyard. You sacrifice Atsushi the next turn, get even more treasure tokens, do even more shenanigans. This allows for some really cool loops. This allows you to be sacrificing things for value that are higher on the mana curve and give you smaller things back. Now, there are a couple of criticisms against this card. For one, the creature has to be sacrificed. It can't be destroyed, so that's notable. You don't just get a free thing every time your opponent blows up one of your things, one of your critters, which is kind of a bummer. But if you have instant speed ways of sacrificing stuff, Dockside Chef or Deadly Disputes, you'll be fine. And Deadly Dispute fits within a treasure deck anyway. The card's fantastic. It's a $2 common for a reason. So that fits nicely into that style of deck anyway. The other thing that's really a bummer about this is the creature comes back into play tapped, so you can't attack with one creature and then sacrifice that creature to bring a blocker out of your graveyard, which would be really cool. Being able to do that at instant speed could really throw off your opponent, and they didn't want to give us that value on a 3-drop for some reason. Kind of a bummer, because that'd be really cool if you could do it, but alas, here we are. I think ability to recur enter the battlefield triggers and death triggers by looping creatures out of your graveyard is good enough to make this card worthwhile. The other fact that you can only do it once each turn is geared to, I believe, prevent infinite loops with this, which could potentially be possible when paired with other cards. So usually when you see do this only once each turn, it's to prevent infinite loops. That's usually what that text is there for. And in this case, it's going to work. Yeah, but on a 3-drop in the Riveteers colors, I think this is very meaningful. Also, notably, the Riveteer mechanic of the set is dash. With dash, you actually put a card onto the battlefield, it gains haste, you get to do whatever you want with it, and then you have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn. So if you dash in a creature, you could then sacrifice it at the end of the turn, and you can pull something back out from your graveyard. In the case of Jaxus, the Troublemaker, Troublemaker, is that the word? Anyway, it's a mana cost 4 creature, or mana value 4 creature, but you can dash it in for 2. So as a result, you pay 2, drop it into play, get to do stuff, potentially create another copy of a thing, sacrifice Jaxus at the end of the turn, draw a card for the dash, and then you can pull a 3-drop or less from your graveyard back onto the battlefield. That's pretty rad. Also in the case of Jaxus, as well as Kiki Jiki, the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, you create token copies of existing cards that you have to sacrifice at the end of turn. In that case, the token copy retains the mana value of the creature that is copied. And so you can actually create a token copy of a 5-drop and use it to pull a 4-drop out of your graveyard. So that can create some very intense, very powerful situations, especially in formats like Alchemy, where you have access to City Stalker Connoisseur, which is already fantastic with Kiki Jiki. So additional value on top of that in Jund is huge, frankly. And I think Riveteers Ascendancy has some potential to really get there. It's just good. Like, I think this card is just good as a build around. Now that's the key. This is a build around card. This doesn't just slot into any Jund deck you're running. It does need to be, you need to design your deck around it. You need to be sacrificing creatures. If you don't have a critical mass of sacrifice effects, this isn't going to work. It's at least not the way you want it to. And so I think a lot of those cards are going to be very important. Deadly Dispute, Fell Stinger, as previously mentioned. Ziatora fits really, really nicely into this. Dash effects, those copy effects with Jaxus and Fable of the Mirror Breaker, that kind of stuff is really what you're going to want to build around this thing. Also, big creatures with death triggers. Cemetery, Cemetery Desecrator, by the way. Shout out to that card. It's a 6-drop that can basically remove your opponent's best stuff when it enters and dies. So that kind of thing could work really, really nicely in this deck too. So just throwing that out there. There's a lot of cool tech related to this card. And in older formats, you can even take advantage of cards like Terror of the Peaks to, take advantage of the stuff entering the battlefield. Anytime you get reanimation, recurable reanimation for 3 mana, even with the kind of restrictions that this has, it seems good. Like, I'm intrigued by the possibilities, and I'm looking forward to building around it. If there are other cards that you would like to see included in a deck alongside Riveteers Ascendancy, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Please leave those in the comments below. And thank you so much for tuning into the video. I appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next one.